Chapter 13. Stella was used to sharing the field path with birdwatchers, their binoculars trained on the woods in hopes of glimpsing the elusive Connecticut warbler. When the small, yellow-bellied bird flitted across their sights, it often drew reverent gasps. But today, with the snow blanketing the trail, there were no warblers, no gasps, no camouflaged enthusiasts tucked into the brush. It was just Stella and Finnick trampling through the snow-covered fields. The isolation took her back to the pandemic days, when people stayed hidden in their homes and her walks grew quiet, her world reduced to this path and her loyal companion. Through those long, lonely months, Finnick had been her steady sanity, an anchor to the ordinary. As they made their way along the field today, the only sounds were the crunch of the snow and a strange buzzing, faint but persistent. Not bees. It was much too early for them to emerge. The noise was higher-pitched, almost like a whine. Then she saw it, a small craft hovering just above the cornstalks, barely visible through the faint morning light. A drone, Stella thought. The drone swept toward the edge of the field, pausing just a few feet ahead of them before it turned back, moving in smooth, calculated sweeps. Stella nudged Finnick forward, her mind circling back to her latest idea to use algorithmic models to trace the intricate threads of penguin ancestry. She wanted to make family trees automatic, not just a map of where a penguin was born, but a deep, layered genealogy that stretched back generations. Imagine being able to track an entire line, grandparents, great-grandparents, uncles, cousins, all weaving back to that one specific penguin. It was more than just science. It was a way to show the connection between these animals and the ancient paths their families had carved through the Antarctic. And then an idea struck her. What if she let sponsors name the lineages? Not just a one-off penguin, but an entire clan carrying the sponsor's name. Someone could adopt a family, save them from the looming threats of climate and pollution, and know that for as long as the colony survived, there would be a whole line of Everdeens waddling across the ice. She smiled, picturing the fields of names like Smith, Chen, and Martinez attached to generations of penguins. It could be beautiful, a permanent reminder that humans had a role in the lives of these creatures, both the risks and ways to protect them. Stella could already see the stories writing themselves. The Smiths migrating across glaciers, the Chens nesting by the frozen shoreline, and maybe, just maybe, a sprawling Everdeen clan. It wasn't long before a familiar figure appeared up ahead, bundled in a thick green parka, hands shoved deep into her pockets. Alice, her breath swirling like smoke in the cold morning air, was trudging through the snow, eyes on the horizon. Stella raised a gloved hand in greeting as they closed the distance. "Hey, Alice, is that your son's drone?" Alice chuckled, glancing over the fields where brittle cornstalks poked through the snow. "Not anymore. It's mine now." Stella slowed her pace, letting her steps fall into sync with Alice's as they walked the trails on the borders of the fields. The silence between them feeling warm against the chill. Finnick bounded ahead, nose deep in the snow, occasionally glancing back to make sure they were still there. For a moment, neither spoke, letting the quiet of the early snow wrap around them. Finally, Alice broke it, her voice casual, yet carrying an edge of curiosity. "I've been meaning to ask you," Alice began, her breath puffing in little clouds. "I saw your latest update on the Penguin Games repo. Quite the setup you've got there. Are you going to Antarctica to test it out?" Stella glanced sideways, catching the glint of a smile at the corner of Alice's lips. The question hung between them, light yet brimming with something else, as if Alice were testing the waters, daring her to share more. Stella felt a grin tugging at her mouth as she looked toward the horizon, imagining the vast icy landscape, dotted not with trees and snow-covered fields, but with endless stretches of white and tiny figures of penguins in the distance. "It's not exactly a quick trip," she said, a touch of wistfulness in her voice, "but I'd love to see it in action in its natural habitat, not just running on my monitors. She hesitated, then added, "But Finnick, it's too long a time to leave him alone." Alice nodded thoughtfully, glancing ahead as Finnick darted through the snow. "Well," she said, as if it were the most obvious thing in the world, "I could watch him. You know he loves these fields. Already acts like he owns the place." She laughed, the sound warm in the cold air. "Seriously, though, what you're doing is incredible. If going to Antarctica lets you see it come to life, you should do it." Stella paused, looking at Alice, her face open and sincere in the cold light of morning. It wasn't often that someone in her life encouraged her to go further, to risk more for the sake of her work. For a long time, she'd felt like an outsider in her field, running her race in silence, rarely stopping to enjoy the view. But Alice had stepped right in, unafraid, seeing not only the code, but the meaning behind it. "Thank you," she said, her voice a bit softer. "Sometimes I wonder if it's all worth it, you know? This work, the late nights, the thousands of lines of code. But you get it." Alice's eyes sparkled, the hint of a conspiratorial grin. "I get it." "I've been using your software," Alice pointed across the field to where the drone was hovering, bobbing in the breeze like a watchful eye. "Made a few tweaks, you could say." Stella's eyebrows shot up, her curiosity piqued. "Oh, tweaks, you say? Do tell." Alice chuckled, slowing their pace further. "Well, I may have borrowed your identification framework. Just a few adjustments for crows, mostly." Her voice dropped, almost sheepish. "You'd be amazed at how useful your setup is for scaring them off." Stella laughed, delighted. "A penguin tracking system turned kangaroo hunter turned crow deterrent. I never thought I'd see the day." She shook her head, a look of admiration slipping into her gaze. Alice's grin widened, and she tilted her head toward the field behind them. "It keeps finding kangaroos." Stella couldn't help but laugh, the sound carrying across the empty field. Alice smiled and reminded Stella of something she'd nearly forgotten, the joy of creation. Not just in solitude, but in connection, knowing her work could have a life of its own beyond her. They walked on, trading ideas and thoughts, their words flowing freely, the drone hovering silently above like a quiet guardian, sharing the snowy fields with them. "No, really, it keeps finding kangaroos," Alice said. "The LLM named them Steve Irwin and Nicole Kidman." Stella considered the false identification. "It must be from the GHKH branch. We tuned the image identification to lean toward kangaroos." Alice nodded, clearly interested. "I think I might have a solution for expanding the range of the drone's cameras without losing resolution. It could make your Antarctic trip a lot more efficient." Stella's curiosity piqued, and she slowed her pace even more. "I'm all ears. I'm working on a new module for lineage detection, trying to trace back family groups through visual markers. Could be useful if we get it right." They stopped at the edge of the field, their conversation grounding to an inspired halt as the last rays of sunlight stretched across the snowy landscape, casting a warm, golden glow over everything. Stella could see that thrill of problem-solving that she knew all too well in Alice's expression. It was something shared, a language that didn't need words. "Well, don't keep it to yourself," Stella said, her smile widening. "Let's hear it." Alice's hands flew into motion, gesturing as she outlined her idea, her voice animated as she explained the adjustments she had in mind. Finnick, oblivious to the weight of the conversation, rolled blissfully in the snow at their feet, his fur gathering white flakes that sparkled in the fading light. The quiet field around them felt alive with possibility, the air humming not just with the faint sound of the drone, but with the ideas that danced between them. Each fed off the other, a small spark growing into something bigger. For a moment, Stella felt a sense of clarity, a shared excitement that brought the future into sharp focus. This was why she'd put her work out there, for connections like this. And as Alice spoke, It felt like the beginning of something important. A friendship bond not just by proximity, but by the things they could build together.